Sophia Randall was handed the keys to the castle. Quite literally. She was granted full rights to remain in the family home until the children finished high school, leaving me, Daniel Randall, saddled with the ongoing responsibility of paying the mortgage and utility bills. As if that wasn't enough, the court awarded her half the value of my business, the business I had poured countless hours and sweat into, while also requiring me to continue covering her car payments. It didn't stop there. A staggering 60% of all our assets, including savings, investments, and retirement funds, were dumped into her lap as well. The children? Of course, primary custody went to her too, with me relegated to being the every other weekend dad and granted 2 precious weeks in the summer. Child support was set at $750 per child, $1, $500 every month. And because Sophia hadn't worked in 5 years, the court deemed it appropriate to tack on an additional $2,000 in monthly spousal maintenance. All of this apparently was justice. The final insult? The judge announced the divorce would be finalized in 90 days, unless I decided to withdraw the petition. As if I would ever consider that. The moment Judge Clara Henderson slammed her gavel and began to rise, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. What exactly is so hard to understand? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. If it's the word itself, I can offer you a definition. Her reaction was almost comical. She froze mid-step, her head snapping toward me, so sharply I half expected it to detach. The look on her face was a mix of disbelief and outrage, as though she had just heard a defendant challenge the authority of God himself. Her expression quickly darkened, and she lowered herself back into her chair, slowly, deliberately, like a lion preparing to pounce. Her glare locked onto me, colder than an Arctic winter. If looks could kill, I'd have been obliterated on the spot. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as her voice, dripping with venom, cut through the tension. "I'm not an idiot, Mr. Randall," she hissed. "I know exactly where you're going with this. You have 1 minute to apologize, or I'll hold you in contempt." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze with equal intensity. "Finally, a ruling I can agree with," I said, my voice steady but filled with contempt. "Because that's exactly what I feel for this entire farce, contempt." My lawyer tugged at my sleeve, whispering frantically, his hands rummaging through his briefcase like he might find a magical scroll to make me shut up. I shrugged him off. Judge Henderson's gavel came down hard. 30 days in jail for contempt, she declared, her voice sharp as a blade. "Make it 60, I retorted, my tone bold and unyielding. "Maybe that'll give you time to relax. Hell, you might even want to try getting laid. It could work wonders for your personality." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. But I wasn't finished. I raised both hands, middle fingers extended, and added with a smirk, "Feel free to take this suggestion to a climax. God knows you need it more than any woman in history." The judge's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. I half expected smoke to pour out of her ears, or for her head to explode on the spot. Instead, her voice, now a demonic growl, thundered across the room. 90 days in jail. The bailiffs were on me in an instant, their hands gripping my arms as they led me away. My lawyer sat frozen, his face buried in his hands, probably regretting every minute he had spent on my case. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or one of defiance. It was the kind of laugh that bursts out when you realize the situation is so absurd it's almost surreal. Unsurprisingly, the next day I received a curt letter from my lawyer's firm. They were dropping me as a client, effectively washing their hands of me. No shock there. I knew what I was getting into, and frankly, I didn't care. But you're probably wondering how it all came to this. Let me rewind a bit. My name is Ethan Randall. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in the heartland of America to a middle-class family that believed in hard work and traditional values. My parents taught me the importance of integrity and respect, values I carried with me into adulthood. To us, a man's word was his bond, and promises weren't made lightly. We lived by the golden rule: treat others as you'd want to be treated. But I learned early on that there's another side to that coin. Treat others as they've treated you. While forgiveness and turning the other cheek might be the Christian thing to do, I've never been particularly good at that. Instead, I've always had what people call a stubborn streak, paired with an unyielding sense of justice. When someone wrongs me, I don't back down. Once my mind is set, I'm like a train with no brakes. Nothing can stop me from pursuing what I believe is right, even if it means barreling straight into disaster. Back in high school, there was this girl, Cheryl Haskins. We'd been dating for a couple of months, and like most teenage relationships, we had our ups and downs. One of those downs came in the form of an argument that led to us breaking up. Well, sort of. It wasn't meant to be permanent. We both knew the drill by then. We'd cool off over the weekend, exchange apologies, and pick up where we left off by Monday. But fate, or something like it, had other plans. That Saturday evening, I was walking past the local theater when I spotted my cousin Harold escorting Cheryl inside. Now, Harold wasn't just any cousin. We were practically brothers. Same age, grew up on the same block, inseparable for as long as I could remember. Harold and I shared everything, except, as it turned out, the same sense of loyalty. You see, Harold knew Cheryl and I had broken up, but he also knew it wasn't really over. It never was. Yet, there he was, arm in arm with her, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. In that moment, something snapped inside me. From then on, Harold was dead to me. Monday came, and Cheryl tried to talk to me. I acted like she didn't exist. At church on Sunday, Harold approached me, his tone filled with forced casualness, probably hoping to smooth things over. I stood there, staring at him in stony silence. When he finished his little speech, I turned on my heel and walked away without a word. That was just the beginning. Later, when Harold's family came over for Sunday dinner, I kept up the cold shoulder. He wanted to play video games like nothing had happened. I shut off the console and went straight to my room. Our parents tried to mediate, urging me to forgive and forget, but I wasn't interested. Even a year later, after I'd stolen Harold's girlfriend out of sheer spite, I still refused to acknowledge his existence. He had confronted me about it once, and I'd responded by smacking him hard enough to send a message. This bridge wasn't just burned, it was obliterated. Years passed, and Harold sent me a wedding invitation. I ignored it. When I got married to Sophia, I made sure everyone in the extended family got an invite, except him. Petty? Maybe. But to me, what Harold and Cheryl did wasn't just some silly high school drama. It was a betrayal, plain and simple. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I'm an idiot for holding on to a grudge this long. And maybe I am. But here's the thing. I don't forgive people who knowingly and intentionally wrong me. Honest mistakes? Sure, I can let those slide. But deliberate actions? No way. And for those of you clutching your pearls right now, let me make one thing clear. I'm a firm believer in personal accountability. If you screw up, you should face the consequences, full stop. You drink and drive? Expect to lose your license, pay the fines, and deal with the fallout, even if it costs you your job. That's what I call a foolish tax. Same goes for everything else. You play around without protection and end up pregnant? Congratulations, your foolish tax is motherhood at 18. And if a guy's careless enough to get his prom date pregnant, he'd better step up and take responsibility. Choices have consequences, always. That's why I worked my ass off in high school. I earned good grades, secured some solid scholarships, and got myself into college. I wasn't about to let someone else's stupidity become my burden. I did well for myself, juggled academics and a social life, dated plenty, and still managed to graduate with an economics degree and an accounting minor. Later, I got my MBA and landed a job at a major firm, making good money. With no real responsibilities and a knack for the stock market, I started investing and quickly realized I had a talent for it. Life was going pretty well. Then one night at a party, I met Sophia. She was stunning, and we hit it off immediately. I asked her out. She said yes, and things progressed from there. Looking back, I have to laugh a little. Of course, I thought she was beautiful. What guy doesn't think his girlfriend is? Beauty is subjective, sure, but in my eyes, she was perfect. Little did I know how far from perfect things would become. Sophia wasn't just beautiful in my eyes. She was a showstopper by anyone's standards. Whenever we went out, heads turned, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle glances she attracted. My friends, being the ever-supportive group they were, had no qualms about letting me know they'd make a move on her the second we broke up. Even a few of my lesbian friends jokingly commented that if Sophia ever became single, they'd do their best to convert her. So, naturally, when I proposed, I was ecstatic that she said yes. We got married, and life seemed to settle into what I thought was our version of bliss. It's worth mentioning that Sophia did go to college, though I often joke that her degree was an MRS degree, a lighthearted dig at women who seem to go to college more for a husband than a diploma. She earned a degree in art history, which essentially qualified her to make lattes as a Starbucks barista. I know I sound like a jerk, but hey, I'm self-aware. Sophia quit her job a week before the wedding and transitioned seamlessly into the role of a stay-at-home wife. Our sex life was incredible, and we bought a charming 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. I was thriving at my corporate job, pulling in solid bonuses, and making significant gains in the stock market on the side. We weren't extravagant in our spending, which allowed us to stash away a considerable nest egg. Every bonus I earned went straight into investments, and I maximized my 401k contributions. I had a goal: to retire before I hit 40. As the years went by, my career soared. Promotions and raises became regular occurrences, and my employer rewarded my hard work with substantial bonuses. I was living the dream, and then one Friday evening, I came home to find Sophia dressed to kill, her face glowing with a massive smile. "Get cleaned up," she exclaimed. "We're going out to celebrate tonight, Daddy." For a moment, I froze, replaying her words in my head. Did she just call me Daddy? The shock quickly melted into joy. We'd been trying to start a family for a few months, so the news wasn't completely out of left field, but hearing her say it out loud, that hit differently. I grabbed her, lifted her off the ground, and spun her around, planting kisses all over her face. That night, we celebrated like there was no tomorrow, knowing that life was about to change. A few months later, our joy doubled. During a routine checkup, we found out we were having twins, 2 little girls. I was over the moon. The thought of 2 tiny daddy's girls wrapping me around their fingers was more than I could have dreamed of. The day finally came, and after a rush drive to the hospital and several hours of anxious waiting, our daughters were born. They were perfect, healthy, beautiful, and with 10 tiny fingers and toes each. Since they were twins, they had to stay in the hospital a little longer, but everything turned out fine. When we finally brought them home, both families were waiting to greet us, and the house was filled with happiness. My mom, in particular, couldn't take her eyes off the girls. I think it was pure joy for her to finally have the grandchildren she'd been hoping for. Life took on a new rhythm after that. My priorities shifted, and I realized that working for a large corporation kept me away from my family more than I liked. Fortunately, I had enough money saved to take a leap of faith. With the necessary licenses in hand, I opened my own investment firm. I'd already been helping friends and family with their finances, so turning them into official clients was a natural transition. Once the business launched, a few former colleagues moved their portfolios to me, and word of mouth did the rest. Within a year, I had a thriving client base and my business was steadily growing. Things were going so well that I felt untouchable. But as they say, when you're on top of the world, there's only one direction to go down. It all started at the girls' second birthday party. We'd gone all out, turning it into a full-blown production. Sure, the girls wouldn't remember a second of it, but I wanted to make it special. We filmed everything so they could watch it later and relive the joy. Both sides of the family were there, and everyone seemed to be having a fantastic time. Then, as I was leaving the bedroom after using the en-suite bathroom, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. My mom was talking to her sister in the hallway. "I just can't figure out where those blue eyes came from," my mom said. Her sister's response made my stomach drop. "Maybe you should ask Daniel about it." Mom sighed. "I can't imagine what would happen if he found out they weren't his. He's so happy right now. It would crush him." My world tilted on its axis. Quietly, I stepped back into the bathroom and locked the door. My mind raced. Surely, the girls were mine. Someone in the family must have blue eyes, right? But the more I thought about it, the more the math didn't add up. My eyes were a muddy brown, and Sophia's were hazel. I combed through mental images of my extended family. The only relative with even remotely light eyes was my cousin Mary, and her green eyes came from her non-blood-related father. On Sophia's side, no one. I stayed locked in that bathroom for what felt like an eternity, trying to collect myself. When I finally emerged, I plastered on a fake smile and rejoined the party, determined to act normal. But deep inside, the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was growing fast. The next day, while Sophia napped with the girls, I got to work. Using a company credit card to keep the transaction hidden, I ordered a DNA test kit. At the same time, I started researching private investigators in the area. If Sophia had been unfaithful, I needed to know. And if the girls weren't mine, I had to be prepared. A few days later, the test kit arrived, and I had also hired a PI firm called Pro Investigations. They promised to dig into Sophia's phone, tablet, and laptop, and I gave them everything they needed. Meanwhile, I started making financial moves to shield my assets. If the girls weren't mine and Sophia had cheated, I wasn't going to fund her betrayal or someone else's children. It wasn't their fault, and I loved them deeply, but I refused to be the sucker in this situation. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. I locked my office door, opened the envelope, and cried for what felt like hours. The test confirmed what I'd already feared but hadn't wanted to believe. The girls weren't mine. I known deep down, but hope is a stubborn thing. The next day, my PI handed me a folder full of evidence. Not only had Sophia cheated on me nearly 3 years ago, but she was still seeing the same man, her blonde-haired, blue-eyed personal trainer. They met a couple of times a week, sometimes with the girls in tow. The audio recording sealed the deal. They both knew the truth, and had kept it from me. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was furious. Over the next few months, I worked with a lawyer to prepare divorce papers. While my attorney recommended a more conventional approach, I had my own plan. I refused to let Sophia walk away unscathed, and I was determined to protect the girls, even if they weren't biologically mine. But that's a story for another day. There's an old saying, coincidences are just life's way of being lazy. Maybe that's true, or maybe it's just a convenient excuse to ignore inconvenient truths. I might have been guilty of overlooking a few so-called coincidences in my own life, like the fact that Cheryl's extended family wasn't exactly what you'd call law-abiding citizens. Some of them were known for bending the rules, with more than a few rumors swirling about their involvement in less-than-legal activities. There was even talk, pure speculation, of course, that a couple of her relatives moonlighted as enforcers for some local underworld types. But that's just small-town gossip. At least, that's what I told myself. The timing of these rumors became interesting, though. Just a few days before Howard and Cheryl showed up at my office to reconcile, there was a local news story about a mugging. The victim? A blonde-haired, blue-eyed personal trainer at a nearby gym. According to the report, he had been jumped by 5 masked assailants shortly after leaving work. The guy made the foolish mistake of trying to fight them off, which ended poorly for him. They stripped him, stole his car and wallet, and left him with a laundry list of injuries. A shattered nose, broken ribs, a dislocated kneecap, and a set of injuries that ensured he wouldn't be fathering children anytime soon. The local police were stumped. No suspects, no leads. The attackers had been smart enough to wear gloves and ski masks. While the man would eventually recover, the doctor said it would take reconstructive surgery and months of grueling therapy. Oh, and his car? Gone to a chop shop. His bank accounts? Drained. His identity? Sold on the dark web. It was the kind of tragedy that you wouldn't wish on anyone. Well, almost anyone. Coincidentally, Sophia was unusually quiet that week. I noticed she was more subdued than usual, almost despondent. She brushed it off when I asked, attributing it to general unease about the rising crime rate. I even offered to install a security system at home, but she just gave me a distracted nod. Something felt off, but I didn't press her on it. By Monday morning, I decided enough was enough. I called my lawyer and told him to finalize the divorce papers and have them served by the end of the week. He pushed back, suggesting I might want to reconsider some of the terms, but I stood my ground. By Tuesday, I was in his office, reviewing the documents and making one final decision. In what might seem like an act of generosity or a calculated move, I decided to give Sophia the house and all the investments. Of course, The investments had been liquidated weeks prior, and there wasn't a cent left in those accounts. She'd be walking away with 100% of nothing. In the meantime, I've been quietly moving my belongings out of the house. Larger items and tools had been relocated to Howard and Cheryl's ranch, while smaller, more personal things were hidden away in a one-bedroom apartment I'd rented under the name of an offshore LLC. The ownership of the LLC was so convoluted that even the most determined investigator would struggle to trace it back to me. The only explanation I offered Howard was simple: you don't mess with family. And despite everything, Howard still counted as family. By Friday morning, the stage was set. I drove to the office, left my car there, and had Howard help me retrieve my truck earlier in the week. From the office, I made a trip to the bank where I drained the accounts, leaving a token $100 in checking and savings. I also emptied the contents of the safety deposit box and transported everything to the ranch. I wasn't about to risk the money being tied up in some newly rented box that could be traced or seized. Cash was safer, and I had a feeling I'd need it soon. Finally, I returned to the house late that morning. Parking a couple of blocks away, I checked the GPS tracker I'd had installed on Sophia's car. As expected, she was at the mall. Back at home, I quickly loaded the last of my belongings into the truck. Clothes, boxes, anything I'd left behind. I didn't bother packing neatly. I just grabbed armloads of items straight from the closet and dresser, hangers and all. Within a few minutes, I was done. I left the garage open and the front door ajar. No point in pretending anymore. Just as I was climbing into the truck, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. No doubt her cards had been declined when she tried to check out. I glanced at the GPS tracker again and saw the signal moving rapidly in my direction. Smiling to myself, I put the truck in gear and drove away without a second glance. I chuckled to myself, tossed my old phone onto the table, and walked out the door. Within minutes, I was several blocks away, pulling into the parking lot of my new apartment. It didn't take long to haul everything from the truck into the various rooms. By the time I cracked open my third beer, I'd finished unpacking and arranging what little I had brought with me. The place wasn't much, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long while I felt a sense of control. As I settled into my recliner, my new cell phone buzzed. Only a handful of people had this number, and Sophia wasn't one of them. Picking it up, I answered curtly. The voice on the other end informed me that Sophia had been served, and they assured me the video of the event would arrive shortly. I simply responded, "Okay, thank you," and hung up. True to their word, the video arrived in my email about 15 minutes later. Watching it, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Shock wasn't a strong enough word to describe her reaction. The recording showed her receiving the papers, staring at them in disbelief before collapsing to the floor. The process server checked to make sure she was uninjured, then left once it was clear she was physically fine. The video cut off there, leaving me to wonder how she reacted when she finally read the details. The DNA results, the evidence of her infidelity, all laid out in black and white. What followed felt like an excruciatingly slow unraveling. Over the next few days, I received multiple calls, some from my former workplace where Sophia had been trying to track me down. She apparently didn't believe them when they told her I had resigned 2 weeks prior and no longer worked there. Her desperation peaked when she showed up at the office, demanding to see me, only to be escorted off the premises by police after causing a scene. Sophia didn't stop there. She started hounding Howard, clearly suspicious of his sudden involvement. But Howard was no fool. He made a few calls, and soon enough, restraining orders were filed against her for both my former company and Howard himself. She had no choice but to back off, at least temporarily. 2 weeks passed before my lawyer finally contacted her to ask for her attorney's information. To no one's surprise, she hadn't hired one yet. Her financial resources were dwindling fast. All she had was the cash in her purse and the $200 I had left in the bank accounts. With no other option, she leaned on her parents for support. Meanwhile, I kept a low profile. I deliberately avoided starting any projects or leaving anything behind that she could latch onto. Eventually, she managed to scrape together enough for a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. I refused to attend in person, instructing my attorney to remain firm. Not a single penny more. The first few meetings were a disaster. Tempers flared, and accusations flew. Sophia demanded answers, shouting things like, "Where's all the money?" My lawyer, staying calm, responded with brutal honesty. "What money?" Her face turned crimson as she screamed. "All our money. We're flat broke. Where is it?" Feigning ignorance, I let my lawyer handle it. He explained that I was living in the cheapest one-bedroom apartment I could find, chosen purely for its affordability and my connection to the owner. The investments? Gone. Checking and savings? Wiped out. It was all a disastrous investment, my lawyer stated. Investing in a cheating spouse. It was technically true. I didn't know where those offshore banks stored their cash, but I was perfectly content letting her think it was gone forever. I had even given her the house, fully in her name. The catch? The mortgage was maxed out, and I wasn't about to make any payments. If she wanted to keep it, she'd have to shoulder that burden herself. She erupted, screaming that she couldn't afford the payments. The situation only spiraled from there. Child support? Not my kids, not my problem. Spousal maintenance? No job, no income, no way. Her demands for 70% of the liquid assets were laughable. There were none. 50% of the business? Good luck. 150% of retirement funds? Lost it all. Arbitration failed spectacularly, which led us straight to court. This brought us face to face with the infamous Judge Clara Henderson, a man-hating, feminist judge notorious for siding with women in cases like this. I was fully prepared for the worst. By now, I knew they'd scrutinize every account and transaction, but I also knew they couldn't access the offshore funds. I'd made sure of that, spreading the money across various banks and accounts under different names, some even tied to Cheryl's gag gift shop IDs. Sitting in the courtroom, 60 days into my 90-day jail sentence, Judge Henderson sneered at me. "Have you learned your lesson yet?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "About not marrying a cheating spouse?" I replied dryly. "Learned that long before this court, Your Honor." Her face turned a furious shade of red as she clarified. "I meant about your attitude in my courtroom." I shrugged. "The only thing I'm concerned about is your blood pressure, Judge. It seems to spike every time we meet. Maybe you should see a doctor." Her gavel slammed down, and she extended my sentence by another 30 days. Then she demanded to know why I hadn't made my first child support or maintenance payments. I smiled, leaning forward. "Well, seeing as I'm sitting in jail and have no access to money, thanks to you, I can't exactly send anything. Maybe you'd like to explain that to my ex-wife." Her vein popped dangerously, and I suggested she slow down, lest her bench catch fire from the flames she was snorting. That earned me another 30 days, but I couldn't care less. Jail wasn't so bad, all things considered. Sure, the food was awful, but I had a bed, weights to lift, and plenty of time to think. My antics in court had earned me a bit of a reputation inside the jail, which worked to my advantage. And, of course, Cheryl's family connections ensured that I had more allies than enemies. The only real issue? One of Sophia's dumber cousins, who thought getting arrested for a minor offense to confront me was a good idea. But that's a story for another day. Spending a week in jail to teach me a lesson, that was his brilliant plan. Unfortunately for him, the moment he stepped into the yard, the entire jail population recognized him. His intentions weren't hard to decipher, especially since his glaring focus on me practically screamed, "I'm here to cause trouble." He made it about halfway across the yard before his luck took a turn. An inmate tossing a football accidentally collided with him, sending an elbow squarely into his gut. He managed to stumble forward, waving off the apology, but his path was soon blocked by a stray basketball that smacked him in the side of the head. The passer apologized profusely, but the damage was done. A few more feet forward, and someone helping him up accidentally delivered another elbow, this time to the chin. It was a comedy of errors, except none of it was accidental. His persistence was admirable, but by the time he reached me, he was battered and bruised, his pride hanging by a thread. He must have thought he still had the element of surprise, though, because he came at me with a poorly timed sucker punch. Anticipating his move, I spun around and delivered a solid kick to his groin. A hit so clean it could have earned me a spot on any NFL roster. He crumpled to the ground, clutching himself, and I just walked away without a second glance. 2 days later, he was transferred to the infirmary, and from then on, he avoided yard time altogether, choosing instead to sulk in his cell until his release. It wasn't a proud moment, but it got the point across. I wasn't to be messed with. Back in court, Judge Clara Henderson sat before me with that familiar look of disdain. She leaned forward, asking, "Are you ready to apologize yet?" "For what?" I replied, feigning confusion. "For your vile courtroom outburst," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "I really don't know what you're talking about." Her patience wore thin as she warned me to keep a civil tongue or risk extending my stay. I shrugged, letting out a frustrated sigh. "Maybe another judge should take over, because you're on my last nerve. Should I start stomping my feet now? Or do we need an EMT on standby in case you stroke out?" Her gavel slammed down, and I could see the vein in her forehead throbbing dangerously. I wasn't making friends, but I didn't care. She accused me of failing to make payments for child support, maintenance, and other obligations. I calmly explained, again, that I was in jail, had no access to money, and couldn't exactly work while incarcerated. She didn't seem amused. "The children need support, Mr. Randall." "Not my kids, not my problem," I replied bluntly. "And as for my ex-wife? She cheated. She could pay for her own life, maybe even charge for it if she needs the extra income." Sophia's lawyer cut in, trying to steer the conversation back to financial matters. "Your Honor, we've been unable to take possession of my client's share of the business. Mr. Randall sold it to an overseas entity before filing for divorce, and we haven't been able to identify the actual owners." Before the judge could respond, a young woman stood up from the back of the courtroom, dressed in a sharp suit. She introduced herself as a representative of the board of directors for the firm that had purchased my business. "Your Honor," she began, "we move to dismiss any ruling awarding ownership of this business to Mrs. Randall. The purchase predates the divorce, and the company has no involvement in this case." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "What about the money from the sale?" The woman maintained her composure. "Regarding the transfer of funds, Your Honor, all payments were conducted overseas. My understanding is that the money never entered U.S. territory. Any claims on those funds would need to be addressed in the jurisdiction where the money currently resides." Sophia's lawyer jumped in. "And where is that?" "The initial transfer was in Belgium," the woman replied smoothly, "but I understand the funds were moved elsewhere shortly after. I don't have access to that information." Her calm demeanor only fueled the chaos. Sophia's lawyer looked desperate. "Your Honor, my client is in dire straits. The house is going into foreclosure, the utilities are about to be shut off, and her parents can't support her indefinitely. She's working as a waitress, but it's not enough to keep her afloat." The judge turned to me, her tone biting. "You have 1 week to bring all payments up to date." I leaned back in my chair, smirking. "Sure, let me bend over and pull cash out of my crack." "Oh, wait, it doesn't exist." Her gavel slammed down again, and I continued. "Your Honor, I'm in jail. I can't work, I can't access money, and I certainly can't make payments from here. Unless you think I've got phantom accounts hidden in my cell, I don't see how I can comply." The courtroom was dead silent as I went on. "The truth is, I don't have a lawyer anymore because I'm broke. As for these so-called offshore accounts, show me the account details. I don't even have access to my financial records to verify their existence. And the sale of my company? That was a fire sale to cover debts after a series of bad investments. There's nothing left." Sophia's lawyer objected, insisting my claims didn't make sense. I shrugged. "Believe what you want. But if anyone's been hiding money, maybe you should ask your client. She and her boyfriend seem pretty adept at keeping secrets." That was the final straw for Sophia's lawyer, who erupted in protest. The judge, visibly exasperated, dismissed me back to my cell with yet another 30 days tacked onto my sentence. Honestly, jail wasn't all that bad. The food was awful, but the free time and exercise equipment were a plus. My courtroom antics had earned me a reputation, which kept most people at bay. And thanks to Cheryl's family connections, I had a few allies who made life inside easier. The only hiccup? One of Sophia's less intelligent cousins decided to get himself arrested just to confront me. But let's just say, that situation didn't work out in his favor. I smirked at the judge's empty threat. Makes about as much sense as keeping me locked up where I can't access any money, while demanding I magically pay all these bills. You've really thought this one through? I retorted, the sarcasm dripping from my voice. Judge Clara Henderson, unfazed by my tone, leaned forward with an icy glare. Are you aware that I can keep you in jail until you pay? She said, as if delivering a profound revelation. I looked at her like she'd just suggested the earth was flat. Oh, absolutely, I replied, feigning agreement. Sounds perfectly logical. Keep me somewhere I'm completely incapable of meeting your demands. Then punish me for not meeting them. Genius plan, Your Honor. 3 months later, the inevitable happened. Sophia lost the house to foreclosure. With the mortgage unpaid, her prized Lexus went next. Unable to afford an apartment, she and the girls moved in with her parents, squeezing into their modest home while she scraped by on a 30-hour workweek at the local diner. Her parents, already struggling, couldn't support her indefinitely, and the pressure was mounting. Desperation finally pushed Sophia and her lawyer to plead for my release. They argued that I couldn't make payments while incarcerated and begged the court to give me a chance to earn money. Meanwhile, her lover, the unfortunate personal trainer, was still in physical therapy. Between his medical bills, ruined credit, and minimal insurance, his financial situation was in complete shambles. At least his credit rating was so decimated that no one could open new accounts in his name. The judge, surprisingly, agreed to a deal. I was released under strict conditions. I had to secure a job, initiate payments immediately, and surrender my passport to prevent any flight risk. I knew they suspected I had hidden assets, but I played my part. I started working at Taco Bell, earning minimum wage, and staying under the radar. Howard and Cheryl welcomed me to their ranch, where I lived discreetly, fully aware of the surveillance watching my every move. Little did they know, most of the cash was already out of their reach, and my next steps were well underway. For 3 months, I kept my head down. Sophia managed to garnish a portion of my Taco Bell paycheck through court orders, but the amounts were laughable. Meanwhile, I finalized my plans with Howard. My apartment, emptied while I was in jail, had been cleared out by family members. Belongings were quietly distributed among relatives, packed, and shipped to a central location. During barbecues and family visits, guests casually loaded packages into their cars, ensuring nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Sophia's antics, however, didn't stop. She started showing up at Taco Bell, creating scenes that disrupted the restaurant. It got so bad that the manager eventually obtained a restraining order against her, barring her from the premises. A discreet payment ensured I kept my job long enough to stay in compliance with the court's orders. Legal meetings were held at the ranch, where my lawyer, Julia, became a frequent visitor. Initially, she represented the new owners of my former company in court, but I soon hired her for my personal case. Julia was a force of nature, sharp, bold, and utterly relentless. She dismissed any concerns about ethical boundaries, joking that scruples were just a form of currency in Russia. By now, you're probably wondering about the money. Yes, I sold my firm, and no, I didn't sell it to myself or leave a trail for Sophia to follow. The sale was legitimate and conducted entirely overseas, ensuring the funds never entered U.S. jurisdiction. This made them untouchable under U.S. law. Bringing any portion of that money into a domestic bank would have made it vulnerable to Sophia's claims, so that was never an option. Between the sale of the company and my investments, my net worth hovered around $10 million. Additionally, I had around $200,000 in cash, some from safety deposit boxes, some from liquidated accounts. After my plans were set in motion, I still had $150,000 on hand. None of it would come with me, but it was enough to ensure everything was executed perfectly. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, and we were hosting another family barbecue at the ranch. Everything was set, and the party was in full swing. I helped Howard with the grill while guests mingled. Julia was there too, lounging by the pool and chatting with relatives. Later in the afternoon, one of Cheryl's uncles approached me. He thanked me for helping Howard and Cheryl, adding that he was glad we'd reconciled. We talked briefly, and as he walked away, he handed me an envelope. Without a word, I passed it to Julia for safekeeping. As the sun set, I made an announcement. The lien holder for the ranch has officially declared the mortgage paid in full. Howard and Cheryl now owned the property free and clear. The crowd erupted in celebration, and the party carried on into the night. Guests began leaving late, and Julia left with a group of 6 cars. Her flight was out of a nearby state, and she had packed earlier, her lease car loaded with everything she needed. What no one noticed was the man climbing out of the back of her car in the airport parking garage. Nor did anyone pay attention to the man walking 50 feet behind her as they made their way to the international terminal. Michael Randall couldn't leave the U.S. His passport was confiscated. But Mitchell Nelson's passport? It passed without a second glance. Sitting in adjoining first-class seats, Julia and I flew to Mexico City. There, Julia Davis ceased to exist, replaced by Samantha Cooper. Together, we boarded a connecting flight to Ecuador. 2 days later, Greg and Samantha Cooper arrived at their hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. The old Chevy pickup waiting for us bore a striking resemblance to one that had disappeared from Howard and Cheryl's ranch. Back in the U.S., things unraveled quickly. A bench warrant was issued for my arrest when I failed to show up for work 2 days after the barbecue. Taco Bell officially terminated me for a no-call, no-show, and my lack of payments caused chaos for Sophia. Howard and Cheryl, when dragged to court, had no answers. Their lawyer argued they weren't responsible for a cousin who rented a room and vanished. They even filed a suit against me for back rent. The judge didn't believe them, but there was no proof to the contrary. Years passed. In Costa Rica, Greg Cooper ran a small charter fishing business, while Samantha managed a cantina. We lived simply but comfortably in a spacious hacienda, our wealth hidden in plain sight. Guests visited occasionally, Howard, Cheryl, and other family members among them. We were generous in the community, helping locals with financial advice and investing in their futures. Life was good. And as for Judge Henderson, let's just say karma had its moment. A few years after my escape, her wife, the man-hating woman she had championed, was caught cheating. The judge, humiliated, was left paying alimony, child support, and house payments, while her ex-wife moved her boyfriend in. Some stories really do have poetic endings.